Excellent. Well, folks are joining. We're at the hour, and we would love to welcome everybody to this informational webinar announcing this exciting new request for proposals from our program focused on supporting, including Indigenous ways of knowing and marine management, conservation, and restoration. I'm Jason Landrum. I'm a senior program officer with the Lenfest Ocean Program, and I manage our wildlife and ecosystems portfolio. With me today, we've got Charlotte Hudson, our program director. We also have Vicki Bell, our senior digital associate, and our outreach manager, Emily Knight, on the screen here with us. We also have a couple other team members out in the audience with you, Kayla Ripple and Rachel Marie Paquin. Our full team will be helping with our webinar today and with implementing this wonderful new opportunity. Before diving into the program today, we would like to offer a land acknowledgement. From the coast to the deep water and across boundaries and borders, we would like to acknowledge the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territories of the Indigenous peoples that have called these lands and waters home since time immemorial. And from our current location in Washington, D.C., we recognize the ancestral lands of the Anacostans, also documented as the Nacoshtang, and the neighboring Piscataway and Pamunkey peoples. And now on to a few housekeeping rules for our webinar today. We are recording this webinar, and the recording will be posted on our website and YouTube channel after its airing. Today's webinar will cover some of the background and details about this request for proposals, but please refer to the PDF of the RFP on our website for more information in greater detail. Participants are muted during the webinar for today, and if you would like to ask a question, please use the Q&A box through the Zoom platform. We are happy to answer all of your questions, but at this point, we wanted to say that we cannot provide specific technical feedback on any project ideas or how we might think different ideas will fare in the review and evaluation process of this competition. At the end of our short presentation today, we will get through as many questions as we can until the end of the hour. If we don't get to your question, you can always email us at info@lenfestocean.org, and we will respond promptly. With that, I would like to invite Charlotte Hudson, our program director, to start us off with some introductory remarks on the Lenfest Ocean Program and our approach to grant making. Charlotte, take it away.
Thanks so much, Jason. And we're excited that so many of you have joined us today. And I wanted to just take a quick moment to introduce the Lenfest Ocean Program to those of you who may not be familiar with us or have worked with us before. We are a grant-making program based at the Pew Charitable Trusts in Washington, D.C. And the mission of our program is to work at the interface between science and policy. You know, our goal is to work with providing communities, individuals, organizations, and managers the information they need to make sustainable decisions about the oceans and coasts. And the way we do that is adapting our grant-making approach to bring those individuals together in order to develop useful and usable science. And so I'm sure you're wondering, how exactly does that play out in practice? And Jason, if you go to the next slide, I can explain a little more in detail. What this means for us, and this is, I think the reason I think this is important today is it may help you understand as a program what we're looking for in proposals and the way we think about how information is used in decision making. So for research projects, for information sharing, for sharing new knowledge, the way we think about it is project ideas where there are challenges in the marine environment can come from anywhere. They don't just come from academic or research scientists. And as you'll see in the first graphic, which is called integrated discussions, we really value the cross-discipline, cross-perspective, cross backgrounds that come together to try to identify what the challenges are facing marine and coastal environments. From those conversations among those groups, project ideas can be born. And that to us is where this RFP really gets at the crux. It's bringing new knowledge sources that aren't new to many, but may be new to management systems together with existing processes in place to try to make more informed decisions about these coastal and marine environments. So from there, if you move across the graphic, when we talk about collaborative research, we really do mean collaborative. It is not that individuals go off into their silos and do their own thing, but they actually work together towards understanding the information needs and what information and data gaps exist and how that information can be brought to bear. From there, that information sharing, I think now is more of a common practice. This is not just, again, about traditional Western science publishing and peer-reviewed publications, but instead all sorts of knowledge being brought to bear and shared among community members, individuals, and managers. And for us, again, that's where the crux of these projects fall, is that information sharing with management communities. You know, this last graphic is about research use. We do believe that research pertains across all spectrums and perspectives. So for us, the rubber hits the road, so to speak, when all of those information pieces come together and then are taken up and used in those decision-making bodies. And that can take lots of different forms geographically and by scale, which Jason will talk a little bit more about. But I wanted to provide you a little bit of this background about the program and then how we are approaching this new request for proposals. So Jason, I'll turn it back to you.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Charlotte, for those introductory remarks. That was really helpful. So as we've mentioned, this request for proposals is focused on supporting projects that elevate the inclusion of Indigenous knowledge and ways of knowing into decision-making around ocean management, conservation, and restoration. While there are several definitions for Indigenous knowledge, for the purposes of this RFP, we are using the widely accepted definition as a cumulative body of knowledge, practice, and belief evolving by adaptive processes and handed down through generations by cultural transmission about the relationship of living beings, including humans, with one another and with their environment. And we also wanted to mention that we are using Indigenous knowledge and Indigenous ways of knowing synonymously for this RFP and throughout the webinar. But first, we wanted to talk a little bit about how our program got here and what our intent is with this RFP beyond Charlotte's introductory remarks. Well, over the past several years, through rigorous scoping and many conversations with a wide variety of individuals in another topical area of interest for our program, marine biodiversity, our discussions led to a clear, broader need that there exist significant gaps in supporting, elevating, and ultimately including Indigenous knowledge and wisdom to inform decision-making for marine resource management, conservation, and restoration. Over the same period, we also recognize greater attention and focus on including Indigenous knowledge into research, policy, and evidence-based decision-making. One example of this was the recently issued statement by the United States Office of Science and Technology Policy and the Council on Environmental Quality, reiterating the significant value and validity of Indigenous knowledge as a form of evidence that should be included in federal policy, research, and decision-making. Through our collective over this time, we found that broader inclusion of Indigenous ways of knowing into decision-making would require additional support in a couple of areas, both in the identification, analysis, and communication of Indigenous knowledge, where it is culturally appropriate, and through engagement approaches that facilitate the consideration of this knowledge in decision-making. And so from these specific needs, our intent of this RFP is to provide support to create more opportunities for Indigenous knowledge to be included in ocean and coastal decision-making, as well as to support Indigenous-led projects with direct funding going directly to Indigenous-led institutions or organizations, if that is preferred. Our scoping also expanded beyond the thematic area of marine biodiversity to reveal that 4 major priority areas to target existed as well, namely fisheries management, coastal development, coastal restoration, and marine spatial protections. During our conversations, these topical areas represented distinct categories where the need for greater awareness and inclusion of Indigenous knowledge and ways of knowing had emerged. We recognize that other intersectional topical themes are also important, such as community health, cultural heritage, coastal resilience, and food security, as these also came up in our scoping. For this RFP, while we welcome proposals that address these intersectional themes, applicants should articulate how they are aligned with one or more of these major topical priorities listed on this slide. So let's dig a little deeper into all of these different areas that we've selected for this RFP. I wanted to say that across all topical areas, we are looking to support projects where Indigenous knowledge and ways of knowing could be considered and or included in decision-making. For fisheries management, example project ideas could include addressing needs at various levels of governance, from national to regional or provincial to local, and that are focused on commercial, artisanal, and or recreational fishing activities. We also note that proposals may focus on individual species that hold cultural, economic, livelihood, or subsistence importance, or on ideas that consider multiple species and or broader habitats and ecosystems that support those fisheries. For the topical category of coastal development, for decades, coastal development activities have grown and accelerated, whether it be expanding infrastructure for growing communities or siting new locations for alternative energy sources. Many of these activities have occurred on lands occupied or previously occupied by Indigenous rights holders, groups whose knowledge is essential for understanding if, how, and to what extent development activities should occur and should be implemented in a safe and sustainable way. In this topical area, example project ideas could present needs and opportunities where Indigenous knowledge can inform coastal development activities now and in the future. The third topical area that we've selected is coastal restoration, which has emerged as a popular conservation approach to returning damaged or degraded environments back to their original state or to a state that is less damaged or degraded. Understanding where and how to restore coastal ecosystems requires multiple perspectives and knowledge, but Indigenous knowledge can be especially important in areas that have long been under the stewardship of Indigenous peoples. Thus, project ideas can identify opportunities where Indigenous knowledge and ways of knowing could inform the identification or selection of potential sites or best practices to apply Indigenous knowledge to in-field activities for restoration of marine habitats and ecosystems. In our last area, marine spatial protections, there are clear information needs at various stages of the development of protected areas, from identifying and selecting the location and bounds of newly proposed areas, to setting protected areas goals and objectives, to executing planned actions and monitoring that's required to reach the intended impacts of those spatial protections. Many different knowledge sources are required at each stage, especially in situations where protected areas are co-managed. Thus, in this topical area, project proposals could identify opportunities where Indigenous knowledge and ways of knowing could inform the creation of new or support existing spatial protections or management at during various stages of their development. So now that we've talked about some of the main topical areas that of focus for this RFP, we wanted to dig into a few things to consider when applying through this grant competition. One is that grants can run for a maximum of 15 months with a maximum of $150,000 total per award. The grant opportunity is a little bit different than what we've supported in the past as a program. Therefore, given the bounds on time and award sizes, we don't necessarily expect or require research activities to be proposed, but we do expect to see a focus on proposed engagement activities, relationship building, and stage setting as major components of the proposed work. And of course, while research is not required, proposals should describe existing information needs, gaps, and the effective approaches that will be used to include Indigenous knowledge in decision-making through the proposed activities. The last point we wanted to make was that there is a geographical focus for this RFP competition to include the United States, including its territories, as well as Canada. We also wanted to talk a little bit about how we're going to evaluate proposals once they start coming in. Applications will be evaluated across 5 major criteria: relevance, usable knowledge, collaboration and engagement, project team and qualifications, and budget. While we won't go into a lot of detail on each of these categories, I'll go briefly over what these categories will be looking for, or how they will be assessed. For relevance, relevance will be assessed based on whether the proposed activities align with the geographical bounds and the overall initial intention of this RFP. Usable knowledge will be assessed based on whether proposed activities align with the decision-making context and address the key needs and ideally identifies pathways for knowledge to be included. Collaboration engagement will be assessed based on individuals who comprise the project team and those relevant partners and or collaborators whose engagement is necessary for the success of the project and for whom have been included in the project design. For project team qualifications, the project team will be assessed on whether the team has sufficient expertise and experiences to implement the proposed work and that they have worked directly with Indigenous peoples, communities, or populations. And lastly, the budget will be assessed based on its alignment with project needs and proposed activities. We also wanted to note that proposals will be reviewed by both internal and external experts in the field, including Indigenous experts. So we also wanted to go over some of the important dates that are coming up for this RFP. One is the launch webinars that happened last night, as well as the one that's occurring right now. Thank you for joining. We also have a proposal deadline as midnight Eastern time on October 16th, 2023. And our anticipated start date after the proposal review and awards have been made, or winners have been selected from that competition. None of the projects will start prior to January 1st, 2024. That will be our start date, our anticipated start date for those awards. And for project end dates, the projects cannot go beyond March 30th, 2025, hence the 15 months that I mentioned earlier. And with that, one last reminder that the deadline for proposal submission is midnight Eastern time on October 16th, 2023. And we wanted to remind folks that both the proposal narrative and the budget spreadsheet must be submitted by email for the application to be complete. And you can send those to our info@lenfestocean.org email, and you will receive a confirmation email once the full application has been submitted. If you don't receive that confirmation email, please follow up with us to make sure that your application has been submitted on time and is complete. And I also wanted to reiterate that all the information about this RFP is available at lenfestocean.org, and we'll make sure that these links are in the chat boxes during this webinar session. With that, thank you for listening, and thank you for your attention as we describe some of the details for this new exciting RFP that we've launched, and we would be happy to take any of your questions.
Jason, thanks so much. And I think to give you a break, there are some questions that have come into the question and answer box. Again, if you have a question, feel free to type it in, and you can paraphrase, so forth and so on. Do not worry, we will be happy to answer as many of these as we can. So I will start at the top. And Jason, why don't I read out the questions, and then either you or I can field the answer.
Excellent.
Okay, first question. Will tribes be able to own the intellectual property of the study?
Yeah, the answer is yes. Part of our process in scoping this specific area, and also in helping to facilitate or helping to address data sovereignty issues with current projects that we are implementing through our program. We are trying to improve. We're trying to work with our Pew colleagues to improve the grant language so that there is greater attention, awareness, and power for the Indigenous peoples and their information to remain within their stewardship. And so part of our process is to ensure that we follow the CARE principles and that we're listening to how to develop that grant language so that data sovereignty is an important component and is a part of the applicant's right and ability, while also thinking about how to develop plans with those Indigenous peoples that are implementing the work to share their knowledge in the most respectful and appropriate way. Great question.
Great, and I believe our our colleague Vicki is actually answering some of these questions, but I'll just reiterate for the group, this webinar will be available online a few days from now, including with the question and answer period. So if there are questions about the evaluation criteria or any of the dates to review, you will be able to find this full webinar posted there. I will say the PowerPoint presentation itself will not be posted as an independent file, but of course, you can fast forward through our comments and view the PowerPoint as part of the recorded webinar. Next question is, can this funding be used concurrently with other funding sources?
The short answer, and Charlotte, you can weigh into if you want. The short answer is yes. I think each, but with a caveat that each project proposal that's submitted has to be a complete set of work that the funding can support. And so while if you do have ongoing, funding sources that are driving the broader scope of your work, and there is a specific project or specific niche that you can apply to this RFP to fill, that is acceptable under the guides of this RFP. Charlotte, anything to add?
Absolutely, it's exactly what I was thinking. The only thing to add there is the portion of the work that falls in this project must be completed again by March 31st, 2025. So it certainly can be a discrete part of a larger project, but that it needs to be a discrete segment of work that does fall within the time frame of this call. Okay, next question. And there are a couple pieces here, Jason, so I'm going to go through the whole thing and then maybe break it down. Do you see projects focusing on blue carbon fitting into this RFP? It seems as if it might span several categories, such as aquaculture to grow seaweed for carbon sequestration, development of marsh or kelp forest restoration projects, and even MPAs that include such projects or are additional for carbon storage by allowing ecosystem recovery, et cetera, thinking about these all being Indigenous-led efforts.
Yeah, this is thank you, Christopher. This is a great question. I think I would respond to this in that as long as it fits reasonably within the topical areas that we've outlined, these 4 topical areas, I would say yes. I think the main intent of this RFP is really to get at your last point, to support Indigenous-led efforts. And so we left these topical priority areas rather broad to be able to have different ideas like blue carbon or other aspects of aquaculture fit into those. And so if you can make the case and fit those under one of the main 4 topical priority areas, I would say yes, especially if they're Indigenous-led efforts.
Great. The next question, do applicants need to be registered in the United States? We are a UK-based fisheries consultancy that has worked extensively in the USA and Canada, but we only have a registered business address in the UK.
I will try to answer, and I will let my colleagues, Charlotte or Rachel Marie, tell me if I'm wrong. But I think it's okay if you're registered outside of the US. I think our main focus is to have the work done within the bounds of Canada, the US and its territories. So if you are registered in another country, yet doing work within those areas, then the grant application would be fine.
That's what I was going to say too, which is great.
Okay.
Oh, but Emily, our colleague Emily may have a point there.
No, I was just going to flag for you that there are a couple of questions that came in the chat. So at a certain point, you might want to just check that. That's all.
Thank you. I apologize. Okay, I will. Oh, thank you. Okay, I'm going to go back and forth now. Let me just scroll down. Okay, next question. How many projects are you looking to support?
So the total amount of funding that we have for this RFP is $1 million. Each one of the projects has a maximum as a ceiling of 150,000, but recognizing that there could be some highly impactful work that doesn't require, that level of funding. So we are thinking that we will fund between 7 and 12 projects in the range of $30,000 to $40,000 to $150,000 as the ceiling.
Great. Okay, let's go back and forth. Is there anything you can say about the potential for future funding from Lenfest to continue this work?
That's a great question as well. At this point, we're focused on launching and executing this RFP, and we will discuss the future potential of other opportunities downstream of this. But right now, we're really putting all of our energy into executing a very successful RFP process.
Great. Next question. Is there any flexibility with the indirect? Our federally recognized tribe is very excited to apply, but we have a negotiated indirect rate of 29% for all grants. So it will probably not be possible to apply for this grant with a strict 10% indirect.
I don't want to speak out of turn, but I believe we have talked to some of our internal colleagues at Pew where the indirect cost rate in the past has been 10%, but it looks like there have been some movements to make that more flexible. So that being said, I can call Rachel Marie up too if she's got some other guidance, but that being said, we didn't want that to be a barrier for applying for this opportunity because Pew is making efforts to make that a bit more flexible and a bit more fair with potential grantees. I don't have a number for you today because I don't think that, at least in my knowledge, exists, but that's what I can share there. Charlotte, I don't know if you had any other words.
I would just echo what Jason is saying, is that, and honor your question here, which is that we're very well aware of the challenge that a 10% indirect rate is for many organizations. In this particular RFP, we are especially, we started working early within the institution to see where we could get flexibility around that rate and what we could do. We don't have a number for you today, nor do we, but just, I would say if you have interest and feel like you have projects that may fall within this call, I would encourage you to apply, and we will work with every organization to the extent we can to make these opportunities be able to be fulfilled. So that's that's hopefully that's where we are at this moment. But it's a great question. Okay, next question is, what is the expected effect of the proposals? How would it be measured?
That is a great question, and two parts there. One part is that we want to support more inclusion of Indigenous knowledge into decision-making in those three areas of management, restoration, and conservation. At this point, we have not set specific metrics for success of individual projects or the larger RFP. That's something that's going to come downstream a bit for us in conversations on actually how to measure that. But our intent is really to offer support to individuals and groups who have opportunities or identified opportunities where Indigenous knowledge could be much more included in discussions about marine resource management, conservation, and restoration. So that is our general hope for success for this RFP.
Great. Okay, next question. Can you clarify what you mean by not expecting research to be included in the proposals or projects?
Yeah, that's a great question too, and sorry if it sounds a little confusing. We mentioned that because we recognize that research often can be a very expensive and time-consuming endeavor. We have limits on the time for these grants and limits on the cost of these grants. And so we recognize that even though we would really love to see research included in the proposals that come in, we recognize that there may not be enough time or resources to really do a full research plan. And so we thought with the time and the funds, we thought an equal impact would be engagement, actually identifying opportunities where Indigenous knowledge could be more heard and so if that required less about the research plan and more about getting the right groups together to really make sure that Indigenous knowledge is in that position, that is why we are making that clarification here. Charlotte, any other words to share?
Yes, only to put a fine point on, I think the very real question is that to incorporate or include or to share Indigenous knowledge, you don't always need to conduct research. So where there are places where research for that collection of knowledge or the assimilation of knowledge or the writing down of knowledge in order to share it is needed, that's wonderful. We are happy to support those activities. If there are other places where Indigenous knowledge is in a place to be shared, there just haven't been the relationships built or the opportunities to do that, we are also happy to support engagement activities or relationship building activities that further that knowledge being shared with decision-making and decision-making processes. So this is, you know, as this individual may recognize, this is a non-traditional Lenfest idea, which is mainly we fund research to inform decision-making. In this case, we are happy to have research included in this RFP. We also recognize that might not be entirely necessary to achieve the goals you may have in your project.
Yep. Thank you, Charlotte.
Okay. Let's see. Next question. Will Lenfest be making grants this year outside of this RFP? And if so, will we be eligible to submit proposals for this RFP and through your traditional grant making streams? Also, are organizations able to submit more than one proposal?
Great, a lot of great questions. Okay, will Lenfest be making grants this year outside of this RFP? The answer is yes. We already had been developing projects or in development stage right now. So there will be grants within my portfolio outside of this RFP, although the main focus of my portfolio is in funding the work out of this RFP. Will you be eligible to submit proposals for this RFP through traditional grant making streams? Yes, the flexibility is there, but if you are interested in the more traditional grant side, you please contact us so that we know. And if you do plan to submit multiple grants to the RFP, I don't have any problem with that. If you have multiple great ideas, that's great, submit them, and we can go from there. Charlotte, I didn't know if you had.
Yes, I think I would, if the project you are thinking about aligns with this RFP, I would encourage you to apply through this RFP. There will not be significant grant making outside of this RFP this year.
Yeah.
And so if that's a question, we are certainly happy to talk offline. And again, with the submitting more than one proposal, absolutely. Although I will say that would be unlikely for the same organization or same set of individuals to receive more than one grant. So the same set of project leaders would not be eligible for two grants, if that makes sense. Although, so take that in the realm of whatever is helpful for your situation. Let's see, is there any present or future opportunities for applications out of the side of the US or Canada?
For this RFP, there are not any opportunities outside of those geographical bounds.
Okay. Next question. Can studies include inland waters that travel out to the ocean estuaries?
They can, as long as there is a strong linkage with those marine resources.
Okay, next question. How does Lenfest define Indigenous-led organizations?
We define it as I don't have a specific answer for this, but basically institutions or organizations that are either led by Indigenous peoples. I actually don't know how to define that anymore. There are institutions that are Indigenous serving institutions that aren't Indigenous led. We are prioritizing institutions and organizations that are led specifically by Indigenous peoples. Charlotte, did you have any other comments?
No, and I think the definition, as Jason said, I don't think we have a strict definition. Of course, we invite proposals from both Indigenous led as well as Indigenous serving organizations. So if you were an Indigenous serving organization or you are a a government agency that is not a tribal government, but a federal or state or local agency that works with Indigenous-led organizations and put those partnerships together. All of those organizations are available to compete for this. It is only that we are looking to prioritize when appropriate. And I will say that there are some Indigenous-led organizations or tribal governments who prefer to have the funding go to other organizations and not, frankly, deal with the paperwork and administrative burden that entails. As long as that is detailed and that is the choice of those organizations, and that is submitted as is detailed in the proposal, that is fine too. We do not want to hinder Indigenous-led organizations that would choose not to have the money. We're just, if they would prefer to have the money, that would be, we'd like to know that too, if that makes sense. The next question is there any flexibility with restriction of personnel fringe rate of 30%?
Yeah, thanks for the question. We talked about this a little bit earlier with indirect costs. Sometimes we have different names, indirect, fringe. And so while our percentage for indirect costs has been set at 10 in the past, we mentioned earlier that we have been working with our Pew colleagues internally to set a number that would be much more amenable within this funding opportunity for various organizations or institutions that are applying. So we can't give a number today, but we didn't want this to be a barrier for folks to apply, as we do have some flexibility, and we are working with our internal colleagues to set numbers that are fair and useful for applicants.
All right. The next two questions I'm going to go through quickly because I think we've spoken to these briefly, and I'm sure these were typed in before we got to those questions. But the question, are single entities able to submit multiple proposals? The answer is yes. However, the selection committee will not likely award 2 grants to the same set of lead investigators. So if that helps. And then again, how many projects are you looking to support? I'll reiterate what Jason shared earlier, which is that the total purse for this RFP is $1 million US. And so depending on the grant sizes and the proposals we receive, we hope to support between, 7 and 12, maybe a few more depending, because of course you don't have to apply for $150,000, but that is the maximum. So that will be our, depending on how the selection committee reviews those projects, that is the anticipated range of numbers of projects we anticipate. Okay, next question. Will you consider a collaborative of tribes?
Yes. I think the short answer is yes, definitely yes. Would, especially if the application really spells out the need for that collaboration and the specific use of that collaboration or need of that collaboration to really advance including Indigenous knowledge in a context within the 4 major topical areas for decision making and restoration management and conservation.
Perfect. I'm going to quickly go to the chat for a quick question, which is about the post award. Is there a collaborative effort among all awarded RFPs? We may be able to learn from other awardees on their project. I love this question, and I actually might call on Emily if she is still available to answer. Sorry, Emily, to answer that question.
Yeah, no, I love that question too. And yes, we're kind of playing the process by ear to see all the proposals that we get in and how the review process goes. And then when we have the collection of projects, we would absolutely think with all the different grantees about ways, they would like further support on outreach from us or want to connect with each other. So the short answer is yes, that's definitely a possibility.
Great, thanks, Emily.
Perfect. Next question is, how broadly do you consider coastal? Would tidal freshwater areas be considered coastal?
I think I'll respond as I did earlier. As long as there's a strong connection with marine resources along the coast, then I would recommend, applying if there's interest there.
Yes, and again, I think as Jason, just to reiterate, Jason, what you said earlier as well, as long as there is a strong tie to decision-making about ocean and coastal challenges and management. I'll take this one. The next question is the geographical scope strict to the US and Canada and US territories, or will proposals for Latin America and the Caribbean be considered as well? Unfortunately, the geographical limit is the US, Canada, and US territories. So if the Caribbean islands are part of the US Caribbean, those would be considered. But unfortunately, at this time, we are not able to accept proposals that occur in other regions. Okay. I'm going to paraphrase the next question, which is, I'm wondering if grant funds from this program could support gathering among tribal members from different communities to identify what traditional ecological knowledge specific to our goals may exist in our regional community.
Yeah, well, I can't speak to the specific example. That sounds like the type of engagement activities that we're looking for in this for proposals in this RFP.
Great. Next question is, to clarify, can this funding be used to to continue or further an existing current project as long as the project completion meets the grant deadline?
Yes, I think everyone is doing a lot of great work in this field, and if there's an opportunity to extend ongoing work, as long as that is a discrete project that can be developed into a proposal for this that meets the specifications and guidelines under this RFP, I think building off of what people have already built already would be something that would be well received.
Okay, I'm going to go through some of these more quickly, and some of these I believe we've already answered, and I'm again sure they were typed in ahead of time, so I'm going to move to different ones. But the question that, just to be sure, projects that take place outside of the US and Canada are not eligible. That is correct. The research team, the lead organization may reside outside of the US, but the project work has to occur within the geographical boundaries. So projects in Latin America, the non-US Caribbean, Africa, Asia, unfortunately, and let me tell you how unfortunate that is, but unfortunately are not eligible for this call.
The only exception I can think of, Charlotte, and you can tell me if I'm wrong about this, is if there is an opportunity for knowledge transfer between Indigenous peoples in different countries as applied to decision making in the US, Canada, or US and its territories in Canada. I can see that potentially being something that would be of value. It just has to be respectful of the decision making context within the geographical bounds. But if there is an opportunity for knowledge transfer from Africa to Indigenous peoples in the US, and that is something that you think is an important part of a proposal to help Indigenous peoples in the United States include their information and decision making. That's maybe one example or exception that I can think of. I just wanted to share that, but Charlotte, you can tell me if I'm wrong or not.
Yes, and again, while Jason and I are answering these questions to the best of our knowledge, these proposals will be reviewed by an internal and external review committee. And so those individuals, while we will give them guidance, of course, those proposals, I think I could say proposals that will rank the highest are ones that will take place within the geographical bounds, to the extent that helps. I think that's really all we can say at this point without knowing how that review committee will react. Do tribal organizations need to be federally recognized?
For this competition, no, they do not.
Great.
We wanted to make a broad remit and open this opportunity to all Indigenous peoples and institutions and organizations that have important work to do and wanted to apply for this opportunity.
Great. Is work in the Great Lakes eligible?
I would say broadly, probably no. Most of the great work that's being done in the Great Lakes is of freshwater. There are some connections with marine resources, but I would say that that probably does not fall within the bounds of this RFP.
Great. Quickly pulling something from the chat. What will the composition of the review panel look like? Question.
That's a great question. We are currently what the composition of the group will be and who will be in the group and what process we're going to follow to fill that out. I know we will try, and we will hopefully succeed in at least getting half of the review panel to be Indigenous experts. That's what we're.
Let's see. How broadly are you defining fisheries? I'm wondering specifically if marine mammals might fall into that.
Yeah, that's a good question. That's a good question. I think marine mammals, if they're, again, the intent of this really is to help elevate and include Indigenous knowledge for decision making. If there are connections with fisheries, marine mammals and fisheries, and you can make a case for it under the 4 topical areas, I think that is within the bounds of this RFP, and it would be an application that we can accept. Charlotte, did you have anything else to add?
No, not. Sounds good. One other question, can this grant be used to bring tribal members to state agency meetings that are involved with the marine protected areas in California? Why don't I take a stab there? Unfortunately, if you're asking if travel and engagement opportunities are supported in this project, yes. I think the end result, though, is also not just the travel and engagement itself, but pathways to ensure that Indigenous knowledge and wisdom is able to be shared and incorporated into that decision making. So certainly travel and engagement opportunities fall within the range of what Jason outlined, but it also would be helpful to see how bringing individuals to different decision-making conversations, what features allow that then for that knowledge to be shared and part of those decision-making conversations. So one last, or several other that have come in the chat. I will make there was a great comment that, of course, that the CZMA, the Coastal Zone Management Act, does include the Great Lakes. 100% agree. The challenge, of course, is that the Lenfest Ocean Program and the work we support has to contain salt. So while the management agency does include the Great Lakes, unfortunately, because of our name and frankly, our remit, we are required to have at least as much salt as not in the areas where we're supporting.
Like that, sure.
So, and then I think the last thing I see is, can previously submitted proposals be repurposed to fulfill the requirements of this RFP? And I think I understand what you're saying there, which is if you have submitted proposals to other funding organizations and they haven't been successful, would they be appropriate for this RFP? And I would say, certainly use what you have. We do not need to reinvent the wheel if you have great ideas that have not been previously supported. I will say if those ideas have been supported, then we do not, I would not suggest, then we can't double dip. But if you have proposals or ideas that haven't been a good fit for other funding organizations, and they do fall within the remit of this RFP, we would welcome all of those. Excellent. set of questions. So thank you all. I will we'll wait a couple more moments to see if any others come in. And Lenfest team, if you see any that I have missed, please let me know. And Jason, I want to thank you for being on deck now and presenting this opportunity, as well as fielding these questions. Why don't we quickly just go over again the reminder of where to submit and what to submit, and give anybody time for any last questions, and then we'll wrap up.
Yep, just want to thank you, Charlotte, for the kind words, and thanks to you and our whole team for putting this together and for getting this RFP going. Yeah, as Charlotte mentioned, please do visit lenfestocean.org for all of the RFP information and guidelines. And that webpage has just been put in by Vicki Bell. Thank you, Vicki. There's a link in the chat. And please do submit, once you're submitting applications, please do submit a full proposal, including the budget spreadsheet, to info@lenfestocean.org. And again, we will be sending out a confirmation email to those. If you don't receive that confirmation email, please do follow up with us.
And I have just seen one other question come in the chat. Thank you, Emily. Although, would you like to, if Emily wants to answer this, and this is fine, but I'll go ahead and take it, which is recognizing that in Alaska, marine mammals are harvested under the Marine Mammal Protection Act. And so would that, I think the question implicitly there is, does that relate to fisheries management, fisheries related activities? I would say yes.
Yes.
Those species are used in different ways by different communities and are, of course, allowed under the Marine Mammal Protection Act. And so I would say, yes, that Alaskan example does fall within the remit of fisheries management in terms of a topical area. Thank you. So I think that is, and thank you all for your very kind words, and thank you for joining. We are honored to be able to do this, and we're excited to receive and start reading. So thank you all. And again, if you have any questions, email info@lenfestocean.org, and we look forward to hearing from you.
Excellent. Thanks all.
Take care.
Bye.